Chapter 8. Despite Zayden's official title, he remained in the abandoned palace. As a gift, Celine renovated the room and placed various textiles around the walls, even switching out his bed. Celine ensured that he was given proper meals every day, and arranged expensive garments for Zayden to wear. The second prince also received education and physical training from an instructor. He relearned the materials Celine had already taught him, and focused on mastering swordsmanship. Unfortunately, the people of Noor did not want to accept the half-Christian prince. He was often ostracized by children around his age while adults regarded him with disgust. This was all encouraged by the emperor, who was displeased with Zayden's unexpectedly strong familiar. He had wanted to get rid of the disgraced prince, yet the second prince was growing stronger every day. The Zionites believed Christians were inferior in terms of intelligence, height, and appearances, but Zayden ignored their direct insults with an indifferent look, infuriating the nobles even more. He never smiled, and his golden eyes narrowed intimidatingly in public gatherings. Thus, his reputation as a cold-blooded prince became notorious. It was a sunny afternoon when Zayden had finished his lessons and decided to visit Celine's residence. Despite his indifference to the palace life, he had attentively memorized every aspect of her room when he had first walked in. Celine's grand room was located in the Diamond Hall near the Crown Prince. Its vaulted ceiling featured elaborately patterned, golden tiles that also covered the walls. The interior's decor was heavily influenced by the arts and crafts from the market. Her furniture and vanity were lavishly adorned with silk textiles. There was a Persian-style carpet underneath her queen-size bed, filled with the softest fabrics and high-quality cushions. In the corner of the room, there was a wooden desk that remained unkept and messy. He had noticed rose petals sprawled over the surface of the desk, along with small earthenware pots and liquids. There were also multiple ancient books and research papers surrounding the desk. "This is where I handmake a lot of goods. The scent you smell from me and oh so love are made from roses." She had smiled confidently at her workspace. The smell of her signature, flowery fragrance lingered in the air. It was the smell that made Zayden infinitely blush and lift up his bad mood. Zayden slightly loosened his stiff facial expression as he recalled this sweet memory. As he reached the Diamond Hall, he walked towards a grand terrace with polychromic tiles of geometric patterns covering the ceilings. Underneath the center of the terrace was a fountain with yellow marble statues. Also below the bulbous dome was a young girl who stood out from a sea of children. He frowned, and Celine immediately sensed a dark presence from far away. She turned to find Zayden's gloomy expression and beckoned him over, to the other children's dismay. Zayden's head was clouded with worry as he reached the scene. Celine was his whole world, and he revolved around her. A crushing sensation overwhelmed his heart as he realized it wasn't the same for her. In this entire world, there was only one Celine. She was special and especially different, and Zayden wasn't the only man who knew. Countless young men came to visit her, and he could do nothing but stare coldly, making sure they never laid a finger on her. The young boy knew Celine already belonged to the Crown Prince. Although he did not understand marriage or love, he knew that Celine wouldn't be able to play with him forever due to this reason. When he had found out, he selfishly wished that his brother would never return from war. "Celine, you are too nice to that barbarian prince. He's short and ugly." The children gathered around her complained and agreed in unison. "I think he is handsome," Celine replied nonchalantly. The children stared at one another in disbelief. One jealous boy gave a disapproving look. "He's isolating you. There's nothing good that will come from being his friend, just because he's the Crown Prince's brother. You don't need to treat him well. And there's nothing handsome about his deformed face." The boy screeched. Celine's expression remained neutral, although her lips did twitch. "Mr. Alayandash, I will let that insult slide this once, but if I hear another insult towards the second prince, I will immediately take it as an offense to the great Zionite Empire. Do you realize the consequences?" Celine wore a cold expression as icy as the second prince, and the boy realized his mistake. The children all gulped in fear and started to disperse from her harsh tone. "Wait, no. My connection." Celine wondered if she had been too cruel. She was chatting with the children in order to build connections and improve her reputation. She glanced at Zayden to see if he was hurt from their words and relaxed at his unbothered appearance. On the other hand, Zayden inwardly released his breath in relief. Since they ran away in fear, they won't bother her in the future. Still, his irritated feelings didn't dissolve completely, so he walked away and ignored Celine for the rest of the day. That very evening, Celine was bundled up in bed when the second prince sneaked into her room. She raised her eyebrows as he quietly slid in next to her. "Oh? I thought you were ignoring me," Celine teased. Rolling his eyes, Zayden turned his back away from her, but he still reached out to grab her hand. Celine couldn't help but giggle at his cuteness. Every night after his newly appointed title, she let him sleep with her, in order to ward off any assassins. She also wanted to make sure he wouldn't feel lonely or have any nightmares. Celine thought sharing her bed with Zayden wasn't inappropriate since they were children. She also thought of him as a little brother. Aki. What? Were you bothered by what those children said earlier? Celine asked hesitantly. Zayden tried to answer her question seriously, but all he could focus on was how sweet and heavenly his nickname sounded from her soft voice. Judging from his silence, Celine misunderstood and thought he was upset. In this world, nobody has my hair and eye color, but I am still considered a pretty person. Even though people may not think this now, you are that pretty person for me. I find your black hair and almond eye shape very beautiful. They're not even as small as the kids said they were. Oh, believe me, it's their eyes that are too big. Also, you're not scrawny, you're lean. There is a clear difference between those two. I actually prefer leaner guys compared to those muscular men. All I'm saying is that I've seen a lot of Christians in my life, and you will probably be the most handsome Christian I've ever met when you grow older. Zayden was completely still and hadn't moved. She didn't see how red his ears were or how he was beaming with joy from her compliments. It's okay to be short. The first person I ever liked was shorter than me and also very skinny. I'm the most beautiful woman in this world. If I can accept a shorter person, anybody can and should at this point. Celine felt like she was rambling and shamelessly spouting nonsense. But these were her honest opinions. Zayden turned around with a frown. Do you still like this person? Celine paused for a long time. The silence seemed deafening. No. He is someone I will never meet again. Just a past memory, nothing more. Satisfied, he moved closer to Celine and wrapped his arms around her waist. For the rest of the night, they talked in Christian until they both felt exhausted. She learned a lot about Zayden's past and was saddened by the lack of parental guidance he had. Celine had her mother in her previous life. She loved Celine so much that she never felt bitter or resentful over her father's absence. Right now, all she could think about was how lonely Zayden must have been after his mother's death. He must have grown bitter and resentful during those times alone. Even when he officially became the second prince, he was discriminated. Thinking he was asleep, Celine held Zayden close to her and closed her eyes. She whispered, I am glad I decided to look for you that night. I was also very lonely, you know. I don't know how I should say this, but your existence is special to me. And for now on, you have me. I promise I will love you in place of your father and mother. My love will be big enough to fill the empty spot of your mother and father. Celine never noticed a pair of golden eyes staring at her incredulously in the dark. She would never know that Zayden was wide awake that night, holding on to every word she had whispered, engraving it to his heart. Chapter 9. Celine was 12 years old when she ordered Draco to introduce the aqueduct system to the Zionite Empire. In her previous life, she had closely studied the Roman aqueducts for an engineering project. She still remembered how the complex network of channels and pipes were constructed and built. She had perfectly recreated the blueprints over the years and went over the functions with Draco. When it was time to present this proposal, she was forced to rely on her familiar's male form to relay the information since women were not taken seriously during this time period. Although she was bitter about this prospect, the aqueducts would greatly improve the water system and prevent diseases caused by dirty water. It took multiple attempts for Draco to gain approval for the aqueducts since the emperor was unyielding. The emperor finally gave in to the proposal after a renowned scholar happened to read over the blueprints and persuade the officials to fund the project. Due to the pressure from other scholars and officials, the emperor ordered Draco to begin construction. Thus, in the upcoming years, the land of Nor would be the first country to possess this new technology. The aqueducts were masonry channels made up of stone, sand, lime, and water to provide fresh water to populated areas. There would be a series of pipes, tunnels, canals, and bridges that would allow aqueducts to transport water to the city from lakes and springs. It would then provide fresh water for the people and supply fountains. This organization required a great deal of planning, money, and time to build. If Draco continued to lead the project, Celine would not be able to generate any profit. Her main objective was to introduce an idea and sell it for a large sum of money. Therefore, when rich officials offered a handsome amount to take over the job, Celine happily withdrew. She undertook multiple ventures to make revenue because Celine wanted to buy an estate in Krastia. If Celine failed to change her fate in time, she would escape to Krastia and live quietly in the mountains. She chose Krastia because it closely resembled her country in her previous life, and Celine wanted to live in an area that felt somewhat familiar. In order to fulfill this vision, she needed money to buy land and build a house. Celine sent Draco on a mission to buy a piece of land just outside of Krastia's most bustling urban city. She wanted to live secluded in the mountains, but not be too far from other humans. Apart from the money they earned from selling the aqueduct's blueprints, Celine also handed Draco the riches she earned from selling exquisite textiles and her untouched monthly allowances from the emperor. Although the temporary separation from her familiar was desolating and left an empty space in her heart, only Draco could accomplish this goal successfully. This hope filled the void in her heart and reassured her. In the meantime, Celine intended to make more profit. Celine decided to sell her handmade goods. Because the Zaydenite Empire was known for their textiles and spices, Celine had to invent a unique idea in order to find major success. That was when she realized she could create different fragrances using rare flowers from the palace's gardens. Gardens were rare in Noor's desert lands, and only the imperial palace had the resources to grow such beautiful flowers. These flowers would increase the value of her products, and merchants would struggle to create substitute goods to compete with her. Because making a spray bottle was difficult and costly, she decided to make lotion and place them inside small, porcelain pots with matching lids. There were many products Celine wanted to make, but gathering materials and starting from scratch proved to be overwhelmingly difficult. There were many different oils and acids Celine had to gather and mix. For now, she stuck with producing body lotion and using the leftover flower petals to create blushers and lip tints. After she mass-produced her products, Celine invited 4 of the wealthiest noblewomen from the Zaydenite Empire for some afternoon tea. These 4 women were the most influential figures of society with many connections. On the day of their arrival, she rubbed in lotion all over her arms before donning on a cream-colored gown made out of a silk-based fabric. The gold threads embroidered along the folds of her dress complemented her golden bangles and necklaces. "Miss, you truly are the epitome of elegance," her servant, Hala, squealed with joy. Recently, Celine had grown fond of Hala, her personal servant. She entrusted her with the task of mixing essential oils for her lotion. Hala had been the maid who dropped off food for Zayden in the past. The servants had been told by the crown prince's supporters to starve the second prince, yet Hala disobeyed their orders and gave him leftovers whenever she could. She was thrown into prison awaiting for punishment when Celine had walked into her dark cell and offered to take her as a servant. Hala had always been grateful since then, and continued to serve her master well. It was also nice for Celine to trust and chat casually with a woman once in a while. Hala continued to fill the room with her cheerful voice as she dabbed on a creamy blush onto the apples of Celine's cheeks. Celine also applied the red consistency on the outer corner of her eyelids, then stained the inner part of her lips to create a natural gradient. Compared to the dark and heavy makeup the Zaydenite women wore, her look was much more simple and natural. Celine smiled at her finished look. "Today is a good day to make money, Hala. You look so beautiful today, Your Grace. Truly, the rumors don't do you justice." Celine beamed in delight as the ladies showered her with compliments. They were seated underneath a terrace in the Diamond Hall, snacking on refreshments and chattering over tedious topics. Seated around the heavily adorned table were the 4 young wives of the highest court officials. Yasna was a beautiful, curly-haired brunette who led the conversation with her smooth manners. Her husband was the emperor's closest advisor, while Zahara, Zaha, and Zizin's husbands held lower positions. "Thank you," Celine smiled shyly and brought her hands together. I wanted to look especially presentable today, since this is my first time hosting a gathering. I am honored to have been invited by such a beautiful lady, the leader of the circle, Yasna answered politely. Pardon me for this seemingly rude question, but may I ask if Celine is wearing any cosmetics? I almost thought you weren't wearing any makeup. Celine nodded, also very curious. Yes, that is what I am also wondering. I can tell you are wearing makeup, but it is very natural. The pink colors on your face makes you look sweet and lovely. You remind me of pink roses. Zahara chipped in. Celine had been waiting for this question. The four women in front of her wore dark eyeliner that covered their entire lids. It was unflattering and tacky compared to the angelic, naturally enhancing makeup Celine wore. Thank you for your compliments. You may call me Celine, by the way. That is the nickname the Crown Prince gave me a long time ago. Celine's smile was filled with warmth, and her flushed cheeks made her seem especially radiant. I know of a merchant who creates makeup out of roses and other natural ingredients. That may be why I resemble a rose. I bought it out of curiosity, but I loved it so much that I also bought something called a lotion from this person. Celine stretched her delicate arms towards them. You are more than welcome to examine my arms because I wore some today. Yasna and the other ladies gasped in shock from her soft, snowy hands. The Zionite Empire was currently experiencing winter, but her hands weren't dry or cracked at all. You must tell us how to contact this merchant, Zahara exclaimed. She imagined how her husband would react to her soft, rose-scented body and squealed with excitement. Although the lotion seems to be a wonderful investment, I am not sure if that kind of makeup will be so flattering on me. After all, our skin tone and features are different. Yasna was reluctant since she couldn't imagine changing her daily makeup routine. Don't worry, it will be flattering on everyone. I had my servant Hala try some on and she looks beautiful. Celine motioned for Hala to come over. She was wearing the same style of makeup as Celine and also looked like a beautiful flower. Thus, the women were immediately sold and wanted to try this style of makeup. After using the merchant's products, I realized less is more. Sadly, only Hala can contact this person since he can be quite difficult to bargain with. But if you tell Hala what you would like to order and pay in advance, I will forward the products to you personally. Celine smiled brightly, and the four women immediately placed their orders. Chapter 10. Celine was exhausted after the meeting. She had never socialized this much since her last life. She had carefully crafted an image of a shy maiden who was in love with the crown prince. It had been exhausting and stole most of her energy. If the women had closely observed Celine's face, they would have noticed that her smile didn't exactly reach her eyes. After assembling the products for each of the orders, Celine decided to take a break and rest underneath the sakura tree in the Japanese-inspired pavilion. The pavilion she cherished was a gift from Emperor Michaelis I to Zayden's mother before she fell out of favor. The emperor had gathered many gardeners to plant Christian flowers such as hibiscus and sakura trees. The concubine became less homesick and looked after the flowers with great care. The fruits of her labor was evident because of how the abandoned garden remained lively and vibrant even after her death. Zayden had been surprised to see his mother's garden still blooming in flamboyance. That was because, soon after her death, Celine diligently cared for the flowers in her stead. It was a touching story, and this pavilion became their haven. Celine sighed as she continued to recount what had transpired today. After chatting for a couple of hours, she had realized how shallow and materialistic they were. The women here were also completely dependent on men. Their goal in life was to please their husbands. It was disgusting and degrading. As she was engrossed with her thoughts, she didn't notice Zayden's approaching figure until he finally spoke. "Where's Draco?" Zayden seated himself next to her but froze for a split second when he saw Celine's dolled-up face. She immediately noticed his pause and snickered. "Oh my, are you surprised with how beautiful I look today? Do you like the makeup?" She batted her long eyelashes and closed the distance between them, giving him a flashy smile. Despite their close proximity, Zayden didn't pull back this time nor push her away like he used to. To Celine's amusement, he looked at her calmly and returned her smile with a smirk. Somehow, Celine felt offended and prepared for an incoming insult. "You look like a rose." Taken aback by his rare compliment, the corner of her lips lifted upwards and she slightly raised one of her eyebrows. For the past 2 years, he had started to become more mischievous and playful around Celine, but he was usually a quiet and reserved person. In public, he was especially cold and curt. Zayden also didn't like to talk, and he usually never responded to her bold remarks. Thanks, Aki. It feels nice to finally be complimented by you for the first time. I am truly surprised. Celine returned to her original position and leaned against the tree. Also, I sent Draco on a secret mission. He'll be gone for a long time. Zayden gave her an indifferent look and took out a book to read. As he flipped through the pages, she observed him quietly. He was now 10 years old and had grown slightly taller. Perhaps it was because Celine was still a child and hadn't fully developed visual acuity, but Zayden looked extremely attractive and adult-like. If she didn't have memories of her past life, she would have swooned from his appearance. His long hair covered his beautiful face, so Celine decided to braid it. She removed the silver hair rings in his hair and created a half-up braided hairstyle. She braided random pieces of hair near his ears and hooked the rings back in. Celine took a step back and admired her work. He looked like a handsome rogue pirate, especially since he was dressed in black garments. Oh, that reminds me, since Draco is gone, can you teach me how to use a sword? No. But I want to defend myself. What if I'm in danger? Still no. Why? Celine pouted in frustration. Wouldn't he master swordsmanship more quickly if he had a partner? You have me. You won't be in danger. Zayden hadn't even looked up from his book and continued to flip to the next page. Much to his annoyance, Celine snatched the book from his hands and slammed it shut. Although I am grateful for your protection, you don't know what could happen. I don't have Draco right now, so I am very vulnerable. What if you don't happen to be there when I'm in danger? Or I'm suddenly kidnapped? I won't be able to rely on you then. When I was talking to the noble women earlier today, I secretly judged them for being so dependent and weak. Then I realized I'm weak too. I am good with self-defense, but I cannot win against a sword. Celine lectured Zayden and continued to complain about her afternoon meeting. Fine, I'll teach you, but only at night. If you dare utter a complaint or disobey my rules as a teacher, I won't instruct you anymore. Okay, I will. Thank you, Zayden. You promise, right? You can't break it. I just need to know how to fight with a sword. NN. Celine became very satisfied with his response and leaned back against the tree again. Meanwhile, Zayden had only agreed so she could finally stop talking. They spent the rest of the afternoon in the pavilion until they started to feel cold. Although the desert wasn't too chilly during the winter, the temperature was almost freezing at night. In the evening, they were both tucked into Celine's warm blanket. Celine was drifting off to sleep when Zayden asked, "Where did you send Draco?" To Krastia, Celine murmured, already half asleep. Zayden didn't believe Celine until he saw her serious expression. Why? Celine never responded. The next evening, Celine wore a loose-fitted shirt and crossed an arched bridge to meet Zayden underneath their secret pavilion. This secluded area was a perfect spot for learning how to use a sword in secret. They had agreed to meet twice a week underneath the sakura tree until her training was complete. Celine was filled with high expectations, imagining herself as one of those beautiful, female warriors from the fantasy novels she had read before. Zayden had arrived before her, and he wore a basic tunic with the braids still in his hair. He held a wooden sword in one arm and a real, sheathed sword in the other. Shining brilliantly underneath the fluorescent moon, Zayden appeared to be mystical and unworldly. Instead of smiling at her approaching figure, he stood with an unconcerned expression as he waited. He stood amongst the cherry blossom trees. The leaves on the trees were green because of the winter season. Celine looked forward to the spring. She wanted to watch the cherry blossoms bloom with Zayden. Today I will teach you the basics of sword fighting, along with how to properly hold a sword or unsheathe one. Zayden explained the psychological aspects of becoming a sword master. A pupil must learn how to build awareness, confidence, and caution when facing an opponent. He described other principles in depth, and then finally started to begin training. Before Celine was allowed to touch the wooden sword, she needed to physically condition herself and build endurance. Celine attentively listened and realized that she was wholly unprepared. She deeply regretted her choice as Zayden listed off what exercises she would need to do. I don't want to run or exercise right now. I just want to know how to hold a sword and fend off any assassins." Celine didn't dare voice these opinions, and she suffered in silence during the entire training session. The next day, Celine could barely move her body without aching in excruciating pain. Chapter 11. Celine took a step forward and raised her long sword for an overhead strike to her opponent. Her opponent, Zayden, easily deflected her attack with a sidestep and twirled around with his sword, nearly slicing her back. "Once again, you almost died." Celine narrowed her eyes and whirled around. "How can you move so fast?" It had been a year since Zayden started teaching her how to use a sword. As they continued to train every other day, Celine came to terms with her incompetence. She had never won against Zayden during their practices, nor had she become a great sword master she envisioned herself to be. Celine's new objective was to learn how to counterattack and defend herself well, aiming for the vital parts of the attacker's body. She was sturdy and proficient, for an average soldier. Meanwhile, Zayden climbed up the ranks and became the strongest sword master. He had earned respect from his comrades, but not from the wealthy families residing in the capital. They didn't dare disrespect him blatantly due to his close connections with Celine. Celine had started to earn a name for herself in the social circles too. She was a trendsetter who introduced various different makeup products through her merchant. She had refined the pre-existing makeup brushes and formulas, making them safer and easier to use. Women looked more youthful and radiant with her cosmetic line. She even received praises from men who noticed their wives appear younger and much more beautiful. Celine also accepted commissions and requests to teach them how to use the products. She did makeup for brides on their wedding night, and even Emperor Michaelis I's concubines came knocking on her door. This phenomenon improved her image and popularity. Her accomplishments attracted the emperor's attention, and she was eventually invited to meet with him privately. Celine was still wary of the emperor due to his reputation. Having a private audience with a wise, great emperor sounded exciting, but having a private audience with an inadequate, unreasonable emperor was petrifying. An unreasonable emperor could commit genocide without any objections. She had personally witnessed the current ruler neglect his responsibilities, commit wicked acts toward his children, and ogle Celine with a perverted scrutiny. He was on the path to becoming a tyrannical leader, if he wasn't one already. She deliberately covered herself and layered as many shawls as she could onto her gown. Hala also understood her intentions and attempted to hide her beauty with a ridiculous amount of makeup. Celine announced her presence and steadily entered the throne room, where the emperor sat on an elevated throne at the center of the lavishly adorned room. There were many decorative, detailed mosaics and motifs surrounding the throne, emphasizing the throne as the central feature. The interior featured golden tiles, ornate tapestries, and patterns on the walls. Her steps seemed to echo clamorously against the marble floor as she made her way towards the throne. A beautiful concubine sat on the emperor's lap, and they were shamelessly flirting while the royal advisors lowered their heads. "Greetings to His Imperial Majesty," Emperor of the Zionite Empire. Celine gave a deep bow and lowered her gaze. "You may stand." The emperor smiled at his future daughter-in-law and withdrew from the embrace of his woman. Celine quickly glanced upwards and saw that he was in a good mood. His eyes seemed to be uninterested in her and only transfixed on his concubine. "My future daughter-in-law is now 13. Shall I grant you a gift? I can give you anything." Then the emperor returned his attention to the woman and squeezed her bosom, and the concubine let out a giggle. Celine suppressed her disgust and bent down even further. "Your Majesty, I am not worthy of your grace and goodness. Residing in the Diamond Hall and living comfortably has already been the greatest gift your Majesty has bestowed upon me. I am feeling very generous today. Your father had handed you over to be in my care, so I must take care of you well, shouldn't I? I insist on granting any wish you ask for." What is that supposed to mean? Can she really just ask for anything then? Celine panicked and felt the palm of her hand start to sweat profusely. She couldn't refuse an emperor twice, so she hesitantly contemplated what she could ask for. Celine couldn't possibly ask for more money when she had a generous allowance, and she already had an abundant supply of material goods. After a long pause, she answered, "Thank you for your consideration, Your Majesty. I do not wish for any gifts, for I have plenty of clothes and riches." Celine paused before continuing, "But I do have a request. Her paws seemed to capture the emperor's attention as he stared at Celine with his golden eyes. As Celine faced him properly, she realized that the emperor was actually attractive and still youthful for a middle-aged man. Leith resembled him greatly, and she was taken aback for a moment. If he hadn't been addicted to his lustful desires, the Emperor Michaelis I might have been benevolent and even earned her respect. I apologize in advance if this request is too brazen or foolish, but I would like your majesty to consider normalizing baths. Celine watched as everyone in the room became dumbfounded by her sudden, bold request. The closest royal advisor, Sir Vigo, was the first person to recover and turn red in fury. How dare you shamelessly utter such absurd and taboo nonsense in front of the Emperor of the Zionite Empire? His Majesty will punish you severely, he raged. She recognized him as Lady Yasna's husband. Showering was considered as a taboo in this time period. There was a stigma against showering because it was believed to spread diseases. But Celine was determined to change this view partly because she was tired of collecting water and secretly filtering it every night to wash herself. Thankfully, soap existed in this time period, and she mixed the ready-made soap with her own oils to add fragrance. She had also used various abrasive components to invent her own toothbrush and paste. Celine firmly believed that Zayden and her were the only humans on Earth who possessed pearly white teeth and did not smell awful. Their skin was also significantly soft and clean compared to the Zionites because of their skincare routine. She wouldn't have requested for this controversial change if she could withstand the revolting stench from the Zionites. She felt as if she developed anosmia, losing your sense of smell. Therefore, she fabricated a false story to convince the nobles. I will do no such thing to my future daughter. I will allow Celine to explain herself. The emperor smiled with amusement. Forgive me for my impudent behavior, your majesty. I will accept any punishment if I have offended the royal family. I suggested this idea because one can also practice good hygiene by cleaning themselves with water. Recently, due to my clumsiness, I fell into the river many times. Although it was an unfortunate incident, I noticed my body had felt clear. I had even smelled better. To further satiate my curiosity, I cleansed my right hand with soap and filtered water for a week. I left my left hand unwashed, and found that bathing improved my skin immensely. Celine lifted both of her hands, and everyone leaned over to examine the differences between her right and left. The right hand was noticeably unblemished and smooth, while her left hand was ashy and roughly textured. In reality, Celine usually worked with her left hand, which led to its rough appearance. Thankfully, no one would expect that Celine did any work. The concubine curiously stepped down from the emperor's lap to touch her hands. Your Majesty, there really is a difference. I would also like to shower every day if my skin will become as soft as her right hand. The concubine gawked and rubbed Celine's arm harshly, leaving a red mark on her dainty skin. She also sniffed Celine's hand and found it to smell like flowers. The concubine believed that she would remain in the emperor's favor if she smelled like flowers too. Meanwhile, the royal officials were still unconvinced and infuriated by her request. Of course, it did not matter since the emperor considered her request. Then I will let my concubine bathe every day for a week. If her skin becomes soft and clean, I will begin to bathe every night. I will also reward you handsomely. A couple of weeks later, the royal officials were astonished by the emperor and his concubine's clear and clean skin. Hence, Celine shook the whole world again with the groundbreaking discovery. Chapter 12. Since Celine had been busy with her business, she could only spend time with Zayden during their sword training session, or at night. Unfortunately, she was always fast asleep before he even entered her room. She hadn't realized this until Hala mentioned how gloomy Zayden had been recently. Young lady has been neglecting the second prince lately. He is very pitiful to look at. I beg our young miss to take a break once in a while, and visit him, Hala implored as she brushed Celine's silky hair. It was already late in the evening and Celine had changed into her nightgown after a bath. She had finished creating a new batch of products and sent them out to her customers. Now she could finally rest peacefully and take a break. Celine felt guilty as she realized the second prince must have felt bored and lonely due to his lack of friends. What has Zayden been doing while I was working? Whenever the second prince wasn't reading or training, he would sit in the pavilion for the rest of the day. He seemed to be waiting for you. Miss Hala seemed especially upset for the adorable second prince, who only had Celine as a friend. Although her master was extremely intelligent for her age, She absorbed herself with work and forgot about the people around her. Now that you have finished working, you must get plenty of rest and play with second prince as much as you can. Hala deeply appreciated the second prince, because only he could make the lady smile brightly. Celine further scolded herself and thought about how she could make up for the lost time. As she was lost in thought over her plans, she didn't notice Hala leave or Zayden entering from the balcony. Celine Zayden whispered hesitantly. His eyes were droopy and looked at her somewhat expectantly with hope. Why do I feel like a mother neglecting her own child? Celine smiled and embraced him with a gentle hug. I'm sorry, you must have felt very lonely recently, but I will change my ways and try to make more time with you. He seemed to accept her apology after a long pause and tightly wrapped his arms around her waist while burying his face in the crook of her neck. Even against her neck, she could feel his mouth forming into a smile. Here, I'll show you a pretty place as an apology. She led him to her balcony and hoisted herself up onto the top rail. She then climbed the thick, interconnected ledges towards the top of the diamond hall. It's safe to climb. If we climb high enough, we'll be able to see the city below us. Even though we won't be able to get to the top of the dome, we'll be right BLAHH. Celine let out a scream as Red seized both her and Zayden onto his back. Or we could fly to the top, Celine muttered. He glided past the spot Celine occasionally climbed up to, and continued drifting upwards. She held on tight to Red with Zayden until they reached the top, flattened section of the bulbous dome. As they took in the breathtaking view, Celine gawked. She had never been this high up in the sky, especially on top of a dome. The air was chilly as she observed the beautiful palace and city below. It looks like a fantasy world, Celine smiled. A sense of excitement washed over her. Zayden was also in awe, peering at Celine and the sky. The stars were shining down on Noor, casting a bright outline on Celine's silvery hair and skin. She was illuminated by the moon as if she was absorbing its luminescence. She almost appeared translucent and celestial in the night, a contrast from his dark hair and eyes. Zayden thought Celine shined brighter than a star. You're always showing me the world, he smiled. His fantasy cold aura temporarily disappeared as he was mesmerized by her. Although their perspective views differed, they were still filled with a sense of bliss and serenity. No need to thank me, the spot I wanted to show you wasn't this beautiful since it wasn't so high up. I can truly see all of Noor. Thank you, Red. They sat side by side at the top, not able to move because they didn't want to slip and accidentally slide down. Suddenly, Celine was overwhelmed with a desire to lean on Zayden's shoulder, but she quickly stopped herself. They continued to sit quietly in a comfortable silence. Meanwhile, Zayden's heart was in a turmoil. His heart beat uncontrollably fast when he looked at Celine, and he covered his heart with his hand. His face was flushed and he wanted to hold her hand forever. Zayden discerned the emotions he felt around her as love, and his yearning heart agreed with the conjecture. It wasn't the familial or friendship kind of love, but something more deep and vast that he could not simply describe his feelings with words. Before his love could even blossom, he already knew this emotion was forbidden and had to be kept hidden. He wanted to be in Celine's arms and watch her under the stars forever, but she never belonged to him in the first place. He had dangerously fallen in love with the Crown Prince's fiancée. Zayden was only 11 years old, but he was fully aware of the consequences if someone were to find out. Therefore, as long as Celine and the world didn't know, he'd continue to remain by her side. He only belonged to Celine, and couldn't bear to be separated from her. His heartache was only beginning. The following evening, Celine successfully landed her blow on Zayden, knocking his sword away and pushing him to the ground. He was defeated easily because he was unfocused and in a daze. Zayden was still enchanted by Celine. He could only lie down on the grass and continue to stare at her with a foolish smile. His heart squeezed tightly and also seemed to shatter from despair. At the same time, Celine believed she won by her pure strength. She had finally accomplished her goals and wouldn't need to train anymore. Chapter 13. After stargazing at the top of the dome with Celine every night, Zayden caught a cold. At first he assumed that his body temperature was increasingly warm due to his crush on Celine, but as he continued to neglect his own health, his symptoms worsened. When Celine noticed these symptoms, he became bedridden. When his fever did not go down after a week, she completely abandoned her work and focused on treating Zayden. His illness caused a stir amongst the nobles since children rarely recovered once they became sick. This world was behind in medicine, and humans could die from a mere cold. Celine also wasn't an expert in the field of medicine, so she resorted to homemade remedies and basic self-care practice. First, she pressed a cool, wet cloth over his forehead and the back of his neck. She washed the rest of his body using a cold rag, while making sure he drank plenty of warm liquids. Back when Celine was sick in her past life, water with honey and lemon would immediately alleviate her sore throat. She forced Zayden to drink honey and lemon water every day while continuing to take care of him. She also closely examined the herbal medicine from royal practitioners and questioned its ingredients. There were only a few medications Celine approved of based on her past knowledge. While he was recovering, Celine wondered how he managed to live thus far. Since he had killed her in the original story, he had clearly survived the forest incident and the cold by himself. But how? Did she accidentally change the story? Did Celine help Zayden in the original story too? Maybe Celine and the second prince were friends. But why would he kill her in the end? Although this was probably unlikely, it was still a possibility. Celine could have been lonely in the palace while waiting for Late's return and sought for the second prince to pass the time. The book wasn't as detailed about the characters anyways, and she knew humans did not possess a one-dimensional personality. Celine is described as cold and heartless, but she probably wasn't always cruel and had her reasonings. Who wouldn't go crazy after watching their loved one fall for another person? What drove her mad with jealousy over an average woman? Celine pondered over these rhetorical questions, then ended her trail-off thoughts to focus on Zayden. Despite Hala's objections, she held onto his hands and laid down beside him. Celine had a strong immune system due to her healthy habits. She also drank the honey and lemon water every day. Even if she caught a cold, she could easily recover and handle herself. Zayden's sleeping form was graceful and pure. His pale skin broke out into a cold sweat, and Celine immediately wiped it away. His features truly are perfect in Korean standards, Celine mused. He looks like one of those cool, Japanese schoolboys from the shoujo mangas I read. As Celine reminisced their time together, she was surprised to discover Zayden in most of her memories. Had she unknowingly become attached to the second prince? Over time, Zayden had somehow developed a mischievous personality that many people probably wouldn't be able to handle. He was clever and sly because he always managed to coax her into carrying out tasks for him, or letting him off easy when he committed any wrongdoings. Before she became overwhelmed with work, she would dry his hair every night, wake him up in the morning to braid it, and often clean up after him. Despite his playful personality, he was kind and considerate. He didn't complain or ask for her often when she received many orders from customers. He even helped her mix formulas and organize the pile of products she produced. He taught her swordsmanship and always waited for her. Although the second prince was mostly reserved and quiet, he had become a reliable person whom she could confide in and speak comfortably with. In some ways, Zayden was a reassuring figure in her life. Without him, she wouldn't have been as mentally strong and capable. Thank you for being a great friend, Zayden. I'm sorry I didn't take care of you well these past few months. Get better soon so we can make more memories together. I promise I will try and spend more time with you. Celine whispered. His eyes fluttered open as if he had heard her, and his small smile enraptured Celine. Have you been taking care of me all this time?" he murmured, tightening his grip on her hands. She nodded in response, still entranced by his beauty and gentle voice. I knew it. I didn't have any bad dreams. I think it was because you were beside me. Thank you, Celine." He fell back into a deep slumber. She continued to wipe his sweat away and massaged his hands until she also fell asleep. Zayden made a full recovery within 2 months and eventually returned to his regular schedule. Celine opened up her schedule frequently to spend more time with him, just as she had promised. Thus, they became an inseparable pair. Celine and Zayden attended a tea ceremony hosted by the court officials. The court officials were aware of the fact that the crown prince's fiancé had miraculously nursed the second prince back to good health. They especially invited Celine and Zayden to observe their relationship. Does Celine favor the second prince now? Will she switch sides? The nobles were curious and itching to ask these questions. In the future, they would also need to choose which faction to support. Although Celine and Leith were engaged, it was not an official promise written on papers. If Celine decided to support the second prince, the powerful backing from her father would switch over to Zayden, and thus turn the tables. As the gathering progressed smoothly, the questions that were initially polite morphed into more ambiguous inquiries encrypted with underlying meanings. They were attempting to catch Celine off guard and figure out whose side she was on. To their disappointment, she consistently answered vaguely and no one could predict what Celine was thinking. Zayden also remained silent and ignored any questions directed at him. Consequently, Celine became irritated towards the end of the meeting. She looked over and nearly choked on her drink. Zayden was falling asleep and trying desperately hard to keep his eyes open. Ugh, why can't these idiots be straightforward and ask what they're actually curious about? I feel as if I've been answering too many questions. May I ask one in return? Celine interrupted and abruptly cut off the incoming questions. She proceeded to talk as they nodded curiously. I wonder if you want to be friends with the second prince or use him as a pawn to get rid of the crown prince, Celine asked bluntly. The current emperor had shifted all of his responsibilities to the court officials. They acted as regent, especially Lady Yasna's husband, Sir Vigo. Sir Vigo had become increasingly greedy for more power. If the responsible crown prince returned, he would lose his power as regent. But if a weaker prince seized the throne with their help, surely he would become a puppet for them. If Celine also favored the second prince, their plan would most likely succeed. Unfortunately, Celine did not want Zayden to be used as a puppet for their selfish desires. The officials coughed in shock and slowly excused themselves, bringing the meeting to an end. Even Sir Vigo sensed her annoyance and left for the day. After all, they were thinking of treason and had become embarrassed. It wasn't until they were finally alone in her chambers when Zayden finally expressed his thoughts. I was taken aback by the sudden question. Sometimes even I think you're too much, Zayden chuckled. She shrugged. It was just a question. They were clearly trying to figure out why we are close to each other by asking an endless amount of annoying questions and beating around the bush. I like people who are blunt and straightforward. Zayden smiled and mentally took note of her preferences. I always have fun with you no matter how boring the situation is. In the future, Celine's liberal perspective and straightforward personality would rub off on Zayden. Chapter 14. Celine was 14 years old when the Zionite Empire finished constructing their first aqueduct, supplying the public with fresh water. The country of Noor also built public baths to accommodate the debunked misconception over bathing. It had also been 5 years since Leith had left for war. Despite his lack of response, Celine had written letters to the crown prince quite frequently, hoping it would bring him some sort of comfort in the front lines. Celine often pondered over the crown prince and his well-being. The war didn't seem to be ending soon, yet the Zionites firmly believed that Krastia would lose. Celine also knew he would return from war and most likely win. But in any case, she was sure that Leith was suffering mentally, if not physically. He was only a child after all. Has he forgotten about her? Why did he never respond? Celine had constantly asked herself these questions in the past, especially since she witnessed other women receiving letters from the warriors while she received none. Now, the worries had disappeared completely. During those times apart, she had created multiple backup plans to secure her future safety. Her life seemed to be in order for the first time, and Celine's friends also gave her the support system she needed to further grow with confidence and live more comfortably. The facade she had slowly built up faded away, along with her fears, and she could finally be true to herself. Celine's new personality was a sharp contrast to her previously shy, timid persona. She displayed a more regal and intimidating expression. Instead of her usual sweet and bubbly act, she became honest and blunt. Her business continued to flourish, and she had already won over multiple noble women. Therefore, she rarely interacted with others and withdrew from the social circles. Although Celine remained cordial and courteous, the nobles considered her to be rude and overbearing. Thus, rumors began to spread over Celine's change. They said she was now a flower dipped in ice. Although Celine was slightly upset over her new reputation, Zayden, who was now 12 years old, felt relieved. The number of men who approached Celine had decreased tremendously since they became intimidated by her. the stress and irritation in his heart had dissipated for the time being. It was a cold, winter day when Zayden gave Celine a letter stamped with the imperial seal. They both sat against the sakura tree, bundled up in a warm blanket as Celine examined the contents of the invitation. It's the invitation for the Familia Ball. Hosted by the imperial family, the Familia Ball was a formal event celebrating the existence of familiars through a series of dances and performances. This ball would be the only night out of the entire year where the Zayden Empire could publicly show off their familiars. It was against ancestral traditions and the laws to display them anywhere else. When the Zayden Empire first became established, the founding emperor and his group of supporters received a blessing from the gods. Each of the men were gifted with a powerful, spirit animal that would be their arms in battles. The emperor and his men were able to defeat the enemies and protect their lands. Therefore, familiars only existed to protect the empire and its people. Their successors would also inherit familiars with various skills. As years passed by, the nobles became arrogant and started to abuse their special power by oppressing the weak or killing other familiars out of jealousy. As if the gods were disappointed in punishing the Zaydenites, familiars became increasingly rare and only a select few nobles inherited them. The emperor during that time placed a new rule in order to save the dying race. Familiars were to never be displayed publicly unless they were at war with another country. This law would essentially decrease the number of greedy, selfish nobles. But since nobles still possessed an innate desire to flaunt their power, the familial ball was born. Celine had never exposed Draco to these events since it was optional. She didn't want to garner any attention and foolishly attract jealous nobles. No one would want to see her familiar anyways, since a fish was considered weak and useless. Zayden also refused to bring his familiar since it would bring trouble to the crown prince's faction, especially since a dragon was considered more powerful than a lion. On the other hand, she was excited for the festivities during the ball, such as the dances, music, and performances. Zayden, you must appear more friendly at this ball. No one will approach you if you keep that emotionless expression. What if you get rejected by all those ladies? Celine exclaimed. I won't dance with anyone. Also, I'm like this because of you. How? I'm very nice and approachable compared to you. Although Celine believed his cold image was due to his traumatic past, it was actually because Celine had rubbed off on him. Celine's natural expressions would sometimes appear scary and intimidating, which Zayden adored and imitated. We've been taking dance lessons the past few weeks, and I expect you to show off what you learned. Then take responsibility of me. Zayden gave her a serious look. Ha! The first dance. Take responsibility by dancing with me first. Zayden knew it was unreasonable to not allow Celine to refuse other men when they asked for a dance. Yet he wished to be the only one who stood by her side the entire night. Of course you need to escort me too. Celine winked. She knew he didn't have friends and would feel left out if she danced with others. We don't have friends, so we'll probably be dancing with each other throughout the night. Hala helped Celine change into a gold, silk-based gown. The thick fabric was embroidered with lotus flowers, while the bangles accessorized all over her arms shined brilliantly. Celine was covered in gold from head to toe, and her purple eye stood out even more as the only other pop of color. She decided to use her darker shadows to create a bronze, smoky look, while Hala braided her hair into a beautiful cascade. Because it was winter, she donned a warmer coat over her dress. Hala fussed over her, humming in satisfaction. I am worried for Zayden. He will have to fend off many boys tonight. Hala, you are always worried for Zayden. What about me? Celine pouted. Hala scoffed. My lady is so pretty that I won't need to worry about you. The world is always easy and nice towards attractive people. Although Hala meant to compliment her, Celine couldn't help but smile bitterly. I've never seen a pretty woman have a happy ending. It was true. The most beautiful women Celine had seen or met in her previous life ended up meeting terrible men or suffered from depression. Before she could voice her opinion, Hala had finished prepping her hair and took a step back to admire her work. You will be the most beautiful maiden tonight, she whispered in amazement. There was a light knock on Celine's door, and the second prince gracefully strutted in wearing a dark-colored kaftan richly embellished with golden threads. His hair was freshly cut and styled to fit the standard curly hair of Zaydenite men. Unlike the average Zaydenite man, Zayden's hair was black and straight, which made his new hair only look slightly waved and textured. His features were rather feminine, while he was on the skinnier side due to his metabolism. He was also shorter and less hairier than the average Zayden, which meant that his beard hadn't grown in yet. Celine was secretly grateful since she thought men looked better clean-shaven. For Celine, Zayden was extremely handsome and perfect. He was lean, well-built, and she knew his pretty face would have gone viral in her world. No matter how different Zayden was from a Zayden man, she couldn't understand how anyone would consider him as an ugly weakling. I guess this empire only has a one-type man. We are extremely late, he reacted indifferently to her striking appearance and continued to walk towards her. He almost seemed irritated. Sorry, I just finished getting ready, Celine smiled. Thanks for helping me, Hella. You're welcome, Your Grace. Enjoy your night, she bowed and gave Zayden a thumbs up before disappearing out the door. How do I look? Celine left her seat and stood slightly taller than him. She continued to talk as he held out his hand, and she elegantly rested her hand on his arm. I truly think you are the only person who won't be mesmerized by my beauty tonight. How can you look at me like that? Do I not even look good to you? She clicked her tongue, frowning at his lack of expression. Sometimes his cold aura made it difficult for her to understand Zayden. What could he be possibly thinking about? I'm used to it because I see you every day. He looked away and stared at her hair adorned with jewels and pins. Celine noticed his ears become red and grinned. Well, I think I deserve a compliment because I spent a lot of time getting ready. I heard that boys are rather reluctant to compliment a woman's beauty. I'm guessing you're still a boy. This jab made Zayden's cheeks flush in anger and embarrassment. I am a man. Maybe you're just ugly. Celine clicked her tongue again. It's okay to be too shy when complimenting a woman, but there's no need to lie. Anyways, I already know I am really beautiful. I guess I don't need your praise. This is why I don't praise you. It all goes to your head and you become more shameless. Zayden nearly stomped his foot on the ground with frustration. It's called confidence. I am merely stating facts right now. I know my place, and it happens to be at the top. She shrugged, clearly enjoying his flustered reaction. It was a refreshing change from his usual silence. Before he could become even more annoyed, Celine tightened her grip on his arm. I'm only teasing you, calm down. On a more serious note, you look even more handsome tonight, Zayden. Will escort me to my first ball. Her teasing tone had been replaced by a softer smile. Her warmth melted his heart, and the hand resting on his arm tingled. He nodded his head, returning to his usual self, and guided her out the door. Chapter 15. Zayden was used to Celine's celestial beauty. He was able to catch himself before falling into a trance. He had prepared his heart for her extravagant look before entering her chambers, and he managed to maintain his indifferent attitude. Truthfully, Zayden was enamored by Celine every day, and tonight was no different. He was more concerned with the men who would approach her tonight. Their height difference annoyed him because he felt incompetent to be the one to escort her. He couldn't even bring himself to tell her how he honestly felt. He criticized himself as he escorted her to a vast courtyard adorned with decorations with the royal family symbol placed everywhere. The emperor sat underneath a tall booth furnished with textiles and priceless ornaments. There were smaller tables surrounding the emperor where nobles were seated by rank. They had missed the opening ceremony and most of the people were already drunk and dancing or chatting near the seats. The nobles who had brought their familiars were sober and flaunting them. She was amazed by all the different creatures roaming around freely. They were in all different shapes and sizes, birds circling around their masters, while animals such as horses of different colors or bigger dogs relaxed in the lawn. Celine was disappointed to see that the emperor hadn't summoned his familiar. He was currently enjoying himself with multiple concubines and not acknowledging his subjects. The first emperor's familiar had been a phoenix, while his son inherited a dragon. The royal family was known to possess the most powerful animals, yet no one knew what Emperor Nicholas II's familiar was. Why does the emperor not reveal any information about his familiar? She whispered to Zayden. Probably because it is weaker than the previous emperors, he whispered back. His reasonings made sense. If his familiar was considered feeble and frail, the royal family's image would plummet. Sir Vigos would definitely overthrow him for that reason. Celine observed Sir Vigos and Lady Yasna, who both appeared reserved and daunting. They were flocked by nobles, and Lady Yasna stroked her bunny familiar while a large eagle sat perched on Sir Vigos' shoulder. Their high social status was evident through their prideful facial expressions. If it wasn't for her friendship with Yasna, Celine would have deemed them as pretentious and too greedy. Lady Yasna might appear haughty and proud, but she was actually a soft-spoken person who was completely infatuated with her husband. She wanted to appear strong for him, and Celine held a certain level of respect for Yasna. She was also the only other noble woman who wasn't shallow or materialistic. Celine also couldn't help but notice Zayden growing increasingly stiff next to her. His gaze was fixed on the floor, deliberately ignoring everyone else. His ominous presence held everyone back from approaching Celine. They could only bow and quickly turn away, stealing glances at her every so often. When Lady Yasna recognized Celine, her proud expression turned soft with familiarity. She smiled and approached the duo. "Lady Celine, you are as gorgeous as always." Yasna bowed deeply and gave a formal greeting to the second prince, who remained expressionless. "Good evening, Your Highness, the second prince of the Zaydenite Empire." "Lady Yasna, it is always a pleasure to see you. You are glowing today." Celine smiled with excitement. Yasna wore a cream-colored gown embroidered with rich colors, and her brown curls was tied back into a gorgeous updo. Her complexion was healthy and tan, appearing sun-kissed and dewy. "I missed you so much. It is so boring without you in our social gatherings. Please visit soon." "You know how I feel about those gatherings," they giggled in secrecy. "I will send you a private invitation where we can chat." Lady Yasna burst out laughing and held her hand affectionately. "I will surely come by and visit. Despite the rumors, I believe you look more lively and refreshing. I wonder what the reason was for this change." She raised her eyebrows and suggestively peeked at Zayden. "Yes, I wonder why." Kalina seems to have gotten very close with the second prince. Sir Vigos appeared next to Lady Yasna and gave a polite bow towards the second prince. Zayden, who had been quietly observing the two friends chat, looked up to see Sir Vigos' calculating smile. His smile filled with hostility. Celine seemed to be frozen in place, unable to respond to the sudden remark. Lady Yasna's complexion paled as she became flustered. "Sir Vigos, it seems that you interrupted the mood between two friends who hadn't seen each other for a very long time. I am merely an escort for my brother's fiancée and keeping her company as a future brother-in-law. That is all." Zayden finally spoke, finally breaking the tension. His smile was filled with hostility. "Yes, as the second prince, may I introduce you to some of my closest connections? We are all closely acquainted." Zayden nodded and excused himself without glancing at Celine. The women watched the backs of the men walking away and entering a crowded circle. Celine furrowed her eyebrows, wondering if Zayden would be fine without her. Yasna was red with shame and she looked guilty. "I apologize, Lady Celine. I shouldn't have made such an absurd remark that could cause misunderstandings. Please forgive me. It is all my fault. My husband can be too much sometimes. I hope you don't despise him. He means well." "I do not blame you, And you shouldn't speak for your husband like this in front of me. I already know what kind of person he is and understand where he's coming from. I don't particularly resent him for his ambitious agenda. I'm just concerned for Zayden. He has never interacted with such a large group before." Celine bit her lip and watched Zayden become engulfed by the towering men. She couldn't even see him in the crowd. Yasna heaved a sigh in relief and continued to grasp her hand. "You don't need to be by him all the time, Lady Celine. It will only fuel the rumors of your affair with the second prince. I am sure he will be fine. After all, the second prince has taken lessons from his tutor and learned how to conduct himself well." Celine widened her eyes and became dumbfounded. "Affair? Is that what everyone thinks? You should already know I would never start an affair under everyone's nose. He is like a little brother to me. Nothing else." Lady Yasna gave a confused look, then realized the situation and smiled as if she had discovered a secret. "Oh my, it was all one-sided," she thought, pitying the second prince. Frustrated by Yasna's current expression, Celine attempted to stalk off towards the station with food and different assortments. She couldn't escape Lady Yasna, who clung to her until she wasn't mad anymore. Soon enough, they were chatting and smiling with laughter.